Welcome. You are about to watch the first panel event presented by Accessibility Hamilton Alliance in honor of International Day of Persons with Disabilities, December 3rd, 2025. The panelists include Karen Mulrooney, who is a white woman with blonde hair wearing a red sweater, Sienna Trigiani, who is a white woman with black-colored hair wearing a gray sweater, Kim Nolan, who is a white woman with blonde hair wearing a purple sweater, and Kevin Boland, who is a white male with dark hair and glasses wearing a button-up shirt and blue zip-up. The interviewers today and moderator for the event are three McMaster students in their fourth year, including Xian, who is a Filipino female with dark hair wearing glasses and a black sweater, Laika, who is a Filipino female with dark hair wearing glasses and a black and white striped sweater, and Hannah, who is a white female with brown hair wearing glasses and a blue button-up shirt. Thank you. All right, welcome everybody to our Alumni Perspectives panel event called Barriers Be Gone. Today celebrating International Day of Persons with Disabilities, December 3rd, 2025. We're so glad you're here and we're able to join us. Before we get into the panel, I just love to sort of run through the agenda for today. We'll be hearing some stories from our panelists who are McMaster alumni and hear about their experiences with navigating campus with disabilities, accommodations at McMaster, and how accessibility on campus might have changed over the last few years. I'd love to first welcome our guest speakers. Today we have Kevin Boland, Karen Mulrooney, Kim Nolan, and Sienna Trigiani. Kevin Boland is unable to join us today, but we were able to pre-record our panel interview with him, and we'll be playing his video throughout the panel as well. Today, just some housekeeping. We'll save any questions for a Q&A at the end of today's panel. So if you do have any questions that come up while our panelists are speaking, feel free to write those down, or you can private message this account in the Zoom chat, the Accessibility Hamilton Alliance, and we'll be able to read those out if you don't want to forget them. But please do make sure it's a private message to this account so that the questions don't get read aloud to any users today who are also using screen reading technology. And yeah, just any other keystrokes that might help with accessibility today. Alt-A is the keystroke for muting and unmuting yourself. Alt-V turns your video on and off, and Alt-Y is to raise your hand to ask a question during our Q&A session as well. Do we have any questions or comments from anyone before we get started? Yeah, Sienna, I can see you raised your hand. Oh, and just muted. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
So just to let everybody know as well, Command-Shift-A for the audio on the Mac, Command-Shift-V for video, and Option-Y for raising your hand.
Awesome.
Just if anybody's using a Mac.
Amazing. All right, well, without further ado, we will get started with our first video for today, which is from Kevin Boland.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Laika, and I am currently a fourth-year undergraduate student in the Honors Biology program. And I'm also here as part of the Accessibility Hamilton Alliance, otherwise known as AHA. And today we are interviewing Kevin Boland, who is here with us today. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Laika. I'm a former McMaster student. I entered first year in commerce in 2008. I studied at McMaster for 5 years, I guess, because I did an internship in my fourth year. I'm 35 years old now, if that's important. I work in commercial real estate. I still live in Hamilton. I grew up in Whitby, lived in Toronto for a decade after graduating, and then moved to Hamilton in 2022. I work for a real estate developer called Broccolini, headquartered in Montreal. I work in Mississauga. We do a large commercial large commercial real estate development, primarily industrial and residential. And I've been there for 5 years now. I'm in sort of finance, investments, I've held some other positions at a company called Timber Creek, which I actually interned at as a McMaster student. I worked in Montreal for another company called Cominar, big Canadian REIT. I guess disability related, I was diagnosed with something called LHON, Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, in 2009. And it's basically a hereditary, it causes sudden vision loss, sudden acute vision loss in one eye and then transfers to another eye. It's passed down maternally, so it was in my mother's genetics, and a few other people in my family have also been affected by it. I started a nonprofit called LHON Canada in 2017 to sort of bring some awareness, as it's a very rare disease. And we've been fundraising and having events and bringing the community together since our first event in 2018.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so before we start, I just wanted to say that on behalf of the Accessibility Hamilton Alliance, we thank you so much for being here today and taking your time to answer some of our questions. And today we will be highlighting what accessibility looks like in practice, both as a student and a professional. And I'd love to start with your time at McMaster. Wow. So first, I wanted to ask you, how did you balance coursework with the realities of navigating a visual impairment? And were there any study habits or daily routines that helped you adapt?
Well, originally I started taking fewer courses, like in my second year, which is when my vision loss started, beginning of second year, I guess end of first year, beginning of second year. I started taking a reduced course load, so I took, back then, I'm assuming it's the same today, but it was 5 classes per semester, and I did 3 classes per semester in my first term, which helped make things a little bit more manageable. And then, of course, I connected with CSD, which is what it was called back then, Center for Student Development. I believe it's now called SAS, but it's the same thing. And I was granted a bunch of accommodations, obviously for testing and for sort of in-class notes and stuff. So those were helpful. Study habits, I just had to work a little harder. Depending on the class, I couldn't always, depending on the subject matter, if the class was like a math class or something where there was an overhead or a blackboard, that was often hard. If there was notes that were handed out ahead of time, it was often easier to sort of navigate. But yeah, I think anything that I found difficult, I just had to invest a lot more time. I stayed late at the library, often nights studying, and that was sort of, it was open till like midnight or something back then, or 24 hours, I think, even at some points leading up to exams. So I would find a quiet corner there, and I probably spent a disproportionate amount of time studying. But I was able to motivate myself because I wanted to go out and meet friends and pass my classes, obviously. So that was the motivation.
Okay. So was this like kind of a gradual process, or was it just a big adjustment in a short period of time, do you think?
I mean, I think it was a big adjustment, but the truth is probably that I became better at figuring out what worked for me. But again, it depended a lot on the class and the way the teaching was being done, I found. Just given the subject matter, like a math class was hard because I couldn't, there were often not notes. It was sort of like pay attention in class and what gets written on the board, which was hard for me to see. So those sorts of things were harder. If something relied on more like reading, I had accessible textbooks and stuff, so that was easier for me to navigate. I feel like I was at less of a disadvantage in those sorts of classes, so it depended on the subject matter a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks so much to Kevin for that interview. I'll now pass it on to Xian, interviewing our first panelist live today, Karen. I'd love if you could both please introduce yourselves for our audience today as well.
My name is Karen Mulrooney, former student of McMaster, graduated last year only at the age of 80.
Wow.
Yes. I do have a hearing loss. It was born damaged because I was born breech. I found out that 25% of babies born breech have damaged hearing. So I didn't get the hearing aid until I was 10. And I was fortunate to have my uncle teach me lip reading. He wanted me to go to school mainstream. But really, from grade 1 to grade 8, he was my teacher at night. Because some teachers forget to face me for lip reading. When I got to high school, then there was a lot of textbooks. There was a lot of work on my own to do this. A lot of reading and checking up and dictionaries and everything. So I graduated from high school. Later on, I went to Mohawk College from 1973 to 76. So I'm a graduate of Mohawk in computer systems technology, where I was able to get a job as a programmer, a systems analyst. But there were some difficulties in the interviews, but I finally found one where I lasted for 22 years. And then there was a downsizing happening, and again, I was out looking for jobs, and there were some problems, and I ended up at Sears in hardware. By then, I was near retirement, so I really liked working in hardware. And then while I was working as a programmer systems analyst, I wanted to study something different, social science, and that's when I registered at McMaster University. I believe it was 1986. And Tim Nolan was the founder of the Student Accessibility Services, and apparently I was his first client. And I have to say that helped tremendously in my classroom, having note takers. And I was able to lip read the professors. And that helped quite a bit. So 1986, 1993, and I had to stop because the company I was working for didn't want to pay any more money towards my part-time courses. So, but then when I was in retirement age, and my friend told me about McMaster, and I said, yeah, I was a part-time student. Well, let's go back, you know. So I came back in 2018, and I switched from psychology to religious studies. And then I see Tim Nolan is still there, but then he's retiring. So I was his last client. Because I met with him because there was some issue with one professor. So, but from 2018 till last year, it improved quite a bit from note taking. That part where I could have the lecture videotaped, which you see on the bottom. So I didn't need a note taker. So I didn't have to rely on them. So I'm in the class, and I can still lip read the professors and try to take notes. But most of the time when I came home, I looked over the lectures for the CC. A lot of work, but that's the way it is.
Yeah.
I don't let anything stop me. So if I have a problem, I'm able to go to the professor. And amazingly, I had one professor just 2 years ago. She knew right away what to do. And then she came and told me her sister was deaf and also got a BA. So I didn't have to I didn't have to stress over. It's important that you put the videotape on, so. So I enjoy the courses. I like learning, even though I don't. I make an effort to find out what's said. If it's not important, I'm not going to do it. So I think that's about it. I don't know if you want me to talk about the jobs, the interviews. I had a variety of experience, and there was a funny one where I couldn't get any interviews because I was saying in the resume I have a hearing loss. So the Mohawk staff said, don't put it in, just let them see you. So I started to get interviews. And there was one place, there were two men. I felt intimidated sitting in front of two men. So they're asking questions, and I told them about I'm hard of hearing. I got the sense I didn't want to work there, so I didn't care what I said. So they brought up about my hearing aid, and then that was it. I was annoyed. So I said, you know what? Everybody has some kind of disability. Take you, for instance. You wear glasses so you can see, right? And then the two men were talking. Yeah, you got a point. Well, is anybody making a big deal out of it? And so that was the end of it. And guess what? I got the job as a programmer. So I asked him, why did you hire me? I like your spunk.
Ah,
So I was very forward, I guess confident and everything. So that was an interesting interview.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen, for that introduction. I would just start with introducing myself. So my name is Chian, and I'm a fourth-year undergraduate student in the biology program here at McMaster. And I'm also part of the Accessibility Hamilton Alliance, and we're excited to learn more about you and your time here at McMaster. So just wanted to start off with your first question for today, and that is, when navigating McMaster, what areas or events have been easiest for you to participate in, and what made them work well for you?
Is that question for me? Or
Yeah.
is it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Well, at the beginning, the note taking took a lot of stress away from me and lip reading. But later on, having the videotapes with the CC helped me tremendously because it made me more independent, that I could interpret what's being said instead of relying on someone else's interpretation of the notes. So that was a big improvement right there. That's the biggest.
Would you say
The other thing is the ALD, assistive listening device. I was using that, but I had to use it with that analog hearing aid. I have a digital hearing aid. It didn't work with digital hearing aids. So if I went back to McMaster today, I can't use the ALD with the digital hearing aids. So I think the digital hearing aid will only work if there's a Wi-Fi in the room. And it depends on which Wi-Fi it is.
Hmm.
I still have the analog though. If I were to come back and everything, but That analog is dying out. No one is available to repair it if anything goes wrong with it.
Were there any people or supports that helped you specifically?
With the student accessibility, they've always been there for me, trying to, what's missing, what can we do, So, but having a videotape with the CC, that makes me very independent, and it leaves me to be able to lip read the professor, because I can't really lip read and write at the same time. It's very hard, I'm writing the notes and I'm missing it. Yeah,
Thank you for sharing your insights, Karen.
you're welcome.
Awesome. We'll pass it off to Leica, who will be now interviewing our panelist, Kim Nolan. Please introduce yourselves as well.
Right now?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm Kim Nolan, and I'm 63, and I went to school. I worked at DeFasco to begin with for 12 years until I was 30. And then after that, I had MS and I couldn't work in the steel plant anymore. So I decided to go back to school and get some degrees. And I did. I got a BA, BSW, and an MSW. I went part-time because with the MS, it really took a long time to study. And I used to tape record lectures, but the attitudes of professors were like, I don't know if you can tape record this lecture or not. It was a big deal to try and get professors to agree to let me tape record the lecture. But I would tape record it and then I'd take it home and type it. So it actually taught me twice. I heard the lecture twice, but it was a lot of work. What else? So over the years, it took me, gosh, I took part-time classes. I started with one, and then by the end of my social work career, I was just taking social work and gerontology classes. So they overlapped, and I could take a full course load my very last 2 years, I think. So I finally got finished in 2009 from my master's degree. So it took a long time, but I did 3 degrees, and I enjoyed every minute of it, the learning. What else was there? Is that enough? Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. Can everyone hear me? Yep. Okay. So, yeah, just to reintroduce myself again, my name is Leica, and I'm also in my fourth year of undergrad in the honors biology program here at McMaster. So, yeah, very nice to meet you, Kim. So I would like to start us off by asking you, were there were earlier barriers you faced rooted more in the physical design, the policy, or awareness? And have those areas changed today?
Okay, I wouldn't say physical barriers, they were pretty good. That they were by the time I got there in 1994 was my first class. It was pretty good, the access, physical access. I would say attitudinally, it was tough. It was professors, it was tough for professors to buy into giving us accommodations, even though I had a letter from the Access and Equity Office first, and then CSD. Even though I had a letter, it didn't matter because they just weren't too thrilled about tape recording the lectures. But now it's great. I hear from students I work with at the gym that you guys get the notes in the overheads, and it's wonderful. I wish I could go back to school. Yeah, I think it's improved a great deal from the time I was there, attitudinally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think there were moments where um, peers or instructor awareness made things easier during your time here?
Certainly, some instructors were pretty good, some, but some weren't. And that made it really tough. And actually, there was a student, um, a student was making a big deal about students with disabilities getting accommodations. And there was a little newsletter or something. I was in third year social work, and I remember being really upset because they thought we were getting accommodations to get ahead. But no, we were just getting accommodations to make up for what we were missing. Like I have a visual impairment with my MS, and I can't write. So I needed a tape record. We didn't have note takers then. And so I needed these things not for a leg up, but just to make things even, to even the playing field so I could learn. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was attitudinal was the worst.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, Kim.
No problem.
Awesome. We'll let our third live panelist for today, Sienna, if you could join us as well. Sienna has some questions for you, but please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Sienna. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you guys today. So I was born with what is now called persistent fetal vasculature. It used to be called persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous. And it's a rare condition that caused the blood vessels. There were some blood vessels in the eyes that were supposed to go away before birth or at birth, and they didn't. And so I am totally blind. I have been since birth. Um, and I was pretty lucky in elementary school because I went to elementary school in the 90s, back when it was possible for, with the help of itinerant teachers, it was possible for a student with vision loss to, attend a mainstream school. So I was fortunate enough to have attended a mainstream school all throughout elementary school and high school. And I had itinerant teachers who would come into the school and teach me how to read Braille, teach me, I would have orientation and mobility instruction as well, to learn how to get um, around the school. Of course, I use a white cane. And in high school, I was really, really fortunate to go to high school at a time when technology was starting to be a lot more accessible. Back in elementary school, I used the Perkins Brailler, which was a Braille machine, a Braille typewriter type machine. And that was big and clunky. And in grade nine, um, by grade nine, I had some exposure to computers and JAWS and that. And I really learned technology. I really started to embrace technology in high school, starting in grade nine. Was very fortunate to have a vision resource teacher who really knew how to teach the technology. And by grade 12, I was helping him to write little user guides for assistive technology, how to use there was a note taker at the time called the Braille and Speak, and that's what I used for a while. So I would write little user guides on how to use it, and just really starting to embrace the technology. And then in university, after high school, after grade 12, I took a few years off to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. I was volunteering at the time. I knew I wanted to study languages, and I had studied French and Italian in high school. And I knew that that was what I wanted to do in university. And attitudinally, I would say for the most part, you know, everybody was very, very accommodating. There were some professors that weren't, um, but overall, I could share a bit about that later. But overall, the experience was phenomenal. Professors, students, if I need help getting somewhere on campus, students would, a lot of them would come up to me and ask, "Hey, do you need any assistance?" And if I seemed a bit lost, trying to navigate on campus, students and professors and other staff would come up to me. So, I think it wasn't until I got to university where I kind of realized that, hey, you know, I shouldn't be afraid to ask for help when I need it, So that was really a turning point for me as well. Um, so the university experience overall was amazing in terms of learning accommodations, with the technology becoming a lot more accessible. And I was experimenting with different technologies, JAWS, NVDA, which are screen readers, VoiceOver on the Mac, on the iPhone and iPad. So, I mean, things were getting more and more accessible. And, by that time, a lot of professors were using the Avenue to Learn platform. Not sure what it's called now, but that really helped because professors would write their PowerPoint, they would share their PowerPoints on the platform, and then we would download them and refer to them the day of. And, professors were generally very, very good about reading what was on the board as well. And the tutorial assistants as well were very, very accommodating. And now, actually, it's kind of funny. I wanted to get into like translation and then realized that I would need more schooling. And unfortunately, McMaster didn't have a full translation program as such, but I was able to take French language studies as a major, minor in Italian. And interestingly enough, in my current job as an accessibility tester, digital accessibility tester, testing websites and applications and the like, I'm able to use my French. Not so much these days, but from time to time, I do get a website that comes in or an application that comes in that's in French. And so that allows me to use my written and oral French. So it's amazing how even though I didn't necessarily I didn't necessarily get into a field that required me to use my French and Italian. I must say it's amazing how the education that I received from McMaster really paid off. And also, as prior to doing accessibility testing, I was also one of the receptionists at CNIB for a little while, for about 4 years or so. And, I was able to use my French and Italian there as well. So it's amazing that even though, I'm not necessarily in the field for which I had studied or for which I was planning to pursue a career, it's amazing how things work out that way and how, um, my education at McMaster really did pay off.
Well, thank you so much, Sienna, for your thoughts and your introduction. I would just like to start
My
off with
pleasure.
I'd just like to start off with our first question for today for you, and that
Hmm.
thinking back to your early years on campus, what kinds of orientation or mobility training, either formal or informal, were available to you as a student?
Yeah, so I was really lucky. I had orientation and mobility instructors from CNIB that would come out and teach me the bus route to campus. I'm fortunate enough to have lived and still do close by. Well, I live on the mountain, the Hamilton Mountain, so I was able to take the bus to get to McMaster. Um, and I learned how to get to the buildings that I would be going to often. The um, health sciences center. I had a few classes in there in my early years. Michael DeGroot Center for Learning, and I think what was really helpful was the hours and hours of training that I received to make sure that I was comfortable getting from point A to point B. And with some uh, buildings that were difficult for me to get to, um, there was always students and teachers and professors and other staff that would be, they would ask me, hey, do you need any help? Or if I was really, really lost, I would, ask for help. And I've never really had any issues where people have refused to help, so I'm very thankful for that. Certain buildings that were harder for me to get to, like the Commons building, wasn't really close to a bus stop, so um, it was harder for me to get there, so I'd need to ask for help. But as far as the orientation and mobility training, um, it really helped. The training that I received through CNIB, which is now Vision Loss Rehabilitation, they were very helpful in making sure that I was able to get from point A to point B. A lot of my classes were in the Kenneth Taylor Hall, Togo Salmon Hall, Chester New Hall buildings, and being able to get from one to the other from the from the inside, from the basement of the buildings, that made it a lot easier to get from point A to point B, and getting to the student center, etc. So um, I was very fortunate in terms of orientation and mobility. I didn't have at the time things like the Meta glasses and Ira, which I wish I would have had. Those are apps that help. Um, the Ira app, they help with things like navigation. So they'd be able to view a map of the campus and guide me from point A to point B. I do wish I had had that back then, but the orientation and mobility training that I had was phenomenal.
Well, that's good to hear, Sienna. I'm glad that you only had positive experiences.
Yeah. Um, I was really, really happy, and if I had to do it again, I absolutely would, and would love to with the new technology that's available now. See how that would work using something like Blind Square or the Ira app, etc. and the Meta glasses, they would work with those types of apps. So, I'd be interested to see how that all would play out.
Yeah, that's great. Some great ideas, Sienna. Thank you so much for sharing that.
My pleasure.
We'll go on to our second interview question with Kevin Bowen, so stay tuned for my share screen.
That brings me to something that a lot of students wonder about, especially when they're thinking about their first job, which is, so when you started your first job, how did you navigate the process of disclosure and requesting accommodations?
Yeah, I think this is an important thing. So I was very aware of not doing my best, at least stubbornly, to not burden my employer, or burden them as little as I could. At the time I used something called Zoom Text on my computer, which I no longer use now because there's a bunch of built-in software or built-in accessibility features in Microsoft and Apple products that work quite well. But I had a license to Zoom Text, so I just said, "Hey, look, I think this is all I really need for my job. Um, like I spoke to IT, can I just install this on my computer?" So that was easy. But I mean, I also disclosed, "Hey, look, this is what I have. Certain tasks may take me a little longer, depending on what it is. Like if you give me a printed document, I might just scan it and make notes on my computer so I can blow it up instead of, making handwritten notes or whatever, things like that." I think disclosure is usually the best course of action, but it depends on the circumstances probably, and it depends on people's comfort level. But I think that the biggest maybe piece of advice that I could give, and I understand the job market is challenging at the moment, but if you disclose a disability and your employer or your prospective employer doesn't want to hire you, you probably don't want to work there anyways. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice I would give. I think I don't want to get too political or get into the weeds too much here, but there is a push in some cases, anti DEI stuff. I think that's a lot of nonsense. The point of diversity in the workforce is not diversity of the way people look. It's about diversity of opinion, and diversity of perspective. So I think the smart employers, the good employers, understand that, and the ones who don't, you probably don't want to work there anyways.
Yeah, definitely. So for you, did you feel comfortable disclosing right away, or did you kind of hesitate sometimes? What was that like for you to disclose to your
In my particular case, my first job, I did disclose. It helps a little bit when you are a co-op student, backed by a university. Now in my career, I'm a little bit more established. I still disclose, but it gets maybe a little harder actually later on. I think in the beginning, especially out of school, I think it's maybe a little easier. The salaries are lower, the stakes are a little higher, or sorry, a little lower. But I would still suggest disclosure in basically every circumstance is best.
Awesome. Thanks so much again to Kevin for that interview. And I'll pass it off to Xian again.
So this next question is for Karen, and that is, was there a turning point or key moment that made you feel confident about entering your career?
I'm assuming that you're talking about when I was a graduate of Mohawk in programming. Because right now I'm not working right now because I graduated last year. I'm not looking for a job. But when I graduated from Mohawk, there was a lot of how can I say it? If you tell, when Kevin was talking about disclosure, it depends on the company. It really, really depends on the company. At the beginning, I told everybody because I thought that was the honest thing to do. But the problem was I wasn't getting any interviews. And then the staff at Mohawk said, don't mention it. And as soon as I started sending resumes and I don't mention about my hearing loss, I was getting invitations to come in for interviews. There was still a lot of ignorance back then, but this is in early 80s, 76 to early 80s, you know. Just to give you an example of what was going on back then, like in 1970, I applied for a Christmas job. I did not disclose my hearing loss. I would go in for the interview. I passed the interview. I went in for training. I think it was 4 days training on the cash register. But 3 days later, they pulled me out and they said, we're going to put you on the floor because you learned so fast. So I was working on the floor. But the problem was when I was in the toy department was next door to the shoe department, and the two phones were side by side. So I couldn't tell if it was the toy department phone or the shoe department phone. So sometimes I got it right, sometimes I didn't get it right. But everything else, serving the customers and working on the cash register, that all went fine. But then the lady I was working with reported me that I was missing the phone. So I got upstairs and the same lady who interviewed me and pulled me out of the training early, saying I learned early, said, her words to me was, if I had known you were wearing a hearing aid at the time of the interview, I would never have hired you. That kind of threw me for a shock because I passed the interview and passed the training. That's 1970. The same company in 2003, but different city, but same company. It was just a part-time job, retail. I went in there, didn't say anything, passed the interview, passed the training on the cash register. But when I was working one shift, it was maybe a couple of weeks, one shift, the staff member was giving me information, but she kept turning around and I kept doing what is called a feedback. I wanted to make sure I heard everything right from her. Then she said to me, she turned around to me and said, do you have a hearing problem or something? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do. I just want to make sure I'm getting everything right. Again, I would report it, and same thing. If I had known you were wearing a hearing aid, I would never have hired you. So I was fired. So it's 1970, 2003, 21st century. It depends on the company, the attitude. I did get a job at Sears, but I knew something was going on, and I said to one person, if this ever happens here, I will sue them. So I knew I was being checked out, and I knew I was very good on the cash register. I was very fast. So they didn't do anything to me. But what she did do is not give me as many shifts. But one of the other staff said, I will give you mine. So that was nice, you know. So I think the attitude, sometimes they think the hearing loss or any disability, there's a connection with the cognitive thinking. They think you can't think right, you can't learn right. And that's a lot of ignorance on the people. And trying to talk down to you, trying to use smaller words or yelling and all that kind of stuff, you know. So I just have to, you know, I'm lucky if I get in, I can prove myself. And I have proven myself as a programmer because of the many projects I was given, because I'm very detailed. I'm very, you know, but if I was to go for an interview, I would not disclose it and risk the chance. I want them to see what I can do, because if I mention at the beginning, the chances are I won't get hired. So that's my thought, you know. So
You've made very good points, Karen. Thank you so much.
you're welcome.
Awesome. I'll pass it off to Laika for Kim's next question.
All right, so our next question for you, Kim, is what was the biggest challenge that you faced during your transition and how did you overcome it?
Okay. By transition, that could mean a lot of things. So I'll go back to from the time I was working, I had a full-time job at Dofasco, and then I was diagnosed with MS. And then slowly but surely, I think I got into 5 years, and it was nonstop. It's like things happening different. And then I ended up walking with a limp. And I think having to leave the job was really upsetting to me. I just walked off the job one day. I just had enough and I just went home. And that's it. That's how I left. And I felt really bad about having to leave the job I liked because I had a disability now, and it was really, really difficult for me. I think that transition was the worst. But then I stayed at home and felt sorry for myself for a year or so, and then I decided, no, I'm going to go back to school and see what I can do there. And then that was the best thing I ever did.
Mm-hmm.
So that transition, I think, was the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And going back to school saved me. Yeah.
I'm glad you were able to overcome it that way.
Yeah. It changed my life from the moment I walked in to the school.
That's
Yeah.
good. Good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. Yeah. But Dofasco did pay my tuition. As all I had to do was pass the classes, and they paid the tuition as long as I just sent in my grades. So hey, yeah.
Oh,
You don't want me to work, you don't want me to do it. I could went back when I got my social work degree. I could have went back as a social worker at Dofasco because they have a social worker, but they didn't want me. If I can't do my regular job, then no, just stay on long-term disability. So I did, but they allowed me to work 10 hours a week as a TA in gerontology. Yeah. So yeah, it was good. I got the best of both worlds.
yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Kim.
Okay.
Awesome. I'll pass it off to Xian for our next question for Sienna.
So our next question for Sienna today is, how did your lived experience when at McMaster help shape the way you approach your work today?
That's a very good question. So it's so what I usually do, it's just it really, like, being, studying at McMaster, it really helped me to kind of develop a routine on how I prepare. And I always, uh, I always, like to have a routine where, I have, when I'm studying, for example, and I want to, like, write down notes to think, really important things that I want to remember. I always have a notepad or a text edit open, depending on which system I'm using, and I'm writing down notes as I go along. So that's a habit I've developed um, in university that um, has carried over into my work as an accessibility analyst. Anything important that I have to remember, or anything important that I have to um, share with the team, for example, um, I always write it down in a note and just, keep writing as I go. That's one of the habits that I've developed. Um, and another kind of thing is the punctuality. Try to arrive, if I can, 15 to 5 minutes before a class. I try to arrive as early as possible, to beat the rush and whatnot. And, when I have a meeting for work, same kind of thing. I like to try and, make sure I'm there on time and just give myself that time to prepare. So it's definitely those habits that I've had to develop when I was a student have really um, carried over in that sense, especially when it comes to, taking notes and punctuality and allowing myself the time that I need to really thoroughly study. And, and now in the workplace, well, I work from home, but, with my meetings and whatnot, I like to allow myself ample time to prepare so I'm not cramming at the last minute.
Thank you so much, Sienna. I'm glad that you had very meaningful and helpful experiences at McMaster.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Awesome. I have one more video interview from Kevin, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A with our live panelists right after that.
Now, I'd just love to end on a more personal and reflective note and ask you if you could speak to your younger self, maybe at the moment your sight began to change, what would you tell him about adapting, asking for support, or redefining success?
I would tell my younger self to rely on the resources that are available, like especially in university, because the resources were very good and they were sort of what helped me succeed. And I would also tell myself what I just said about disclosure, because I think that's important. And I wouldn't redefine success. I don't know. Success is if you're redefining success, doesn't that sort of wouldn't that sort of mean you're changing you're setting the bar lower or something? I wouldn't redefine success. I think success with a disability or without a disability is the same thing.
Mhm. Is there anything that you wish someone had told you during your time at McMaster?
Um, no, because I think I received a lot of really good advice from Tim,
Mm.
and I repeat the same things that he told me to other people. So uh, Tim was effective in helping me understand what was important and what to do and how to navigate the school and how to navigate um, challenges in the school with professors or different institutions at the university who maybe weren't helpful or who would push back on certain things. So no, I would give anyone the advice to find someone like Tim who's at McMaster now and in charge of SAS, someone who's going to protect them and guide them in the right direction.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you so much to all of our panelists who have shared so many incredible stories with us today. We'd love to open the floor to any of our participants for any questions you might have for Karen, Kim, or Sienna. Feel free to message them in the chat or raise your hand. And if you do raise your hand and would like to unmute to ask your question, please, we just ask that you introduce yourself, your name, and maybe your program or faculty. Yeah. Yes, Anya.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm just gonna lower my hand then first. Oop, lower my hand first. But yes, thank you all so much for coming and sharing your experiences. I also myself learned a lot as well. Just throughout my time working with AHA as well. And so, oh, just to introduce myself. My name's Enya. I graduated from McMaster last year. I was in the biology physiology program, and I also work. And volunteer with the AHA. Yeah, and this might be a bit more of a general question, but and I know you've all had experiences with assistive technology, but I was just want to take a moment to also appreciate the fact that all the accommodations that you had all requested while you were in school, things like tape recording, recording lectures, or having things like subtitles, recorded videos to look back on. These are all now all things that you had to request and you all had to advocate for. And now these are all very commonplace for everyone, and they don't just assist students who require the accommodations, but all students. I know myself, I lived on the recordings, but especially when I had like 8:30 a.m. classes. They were very, very helpful for me as well as a student. But yeah, and I was just curious. I know all their panelists, you had gone to school at very different periods, and I was wondering perhaps how technology maybe has changed, and do you think that um, the way that technology, the assistive tech devices that you have used, has that meshed well with the rate at which the school has improved their accessibility resources, if that makes sense? So the rate at which, the accessibility devices are changing, has that also been reflected in how the school has used those devices as well, if that makes sense? Ish.
Yes, Sienna, if you'd love to answer that, I see your hands up. Oh, sorry, you're muted. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Oops. There we are. So yeah, that's a very interesting question. As someone who myself is very fascinated by technology, and especially um, assistive technology, and Kevin really touched on that in his videos. But it really, like, it wasn't really, I would say, until, I mean, back then we had JAWS, but when I started high school and all throughout high school, I mean, we had note takers like the Braille and Speak or the Braille Light, which incorporated a Braille display, and the Braille Note, which is what I used in my last couple of years of high school. And that's really what we had. It wasn't until I started university in 2009 when, I started to really notice a lot of improvements, enhancements in technology. And one of the things I find really, really fascinating is how, and Kevin touched on this as well, but Apple have really pioneered, especially with devices such as the Mac, which I used through part of my university career. NVDA I used a bit as well, which meant that I didn't have to necessarily use JAWS. I could install it on any computer. So the whole concept of now integrated assistive tools that are available right out of the box. I mean, Apple really pioneered that, and then, in later years, Microsoft followed suit. With narrator and magnifier built into the operating system. So, I mean, it was interesting to see the transition in, throughout my university career as far as assistive technology. And one of the, kind of advantages that piggybacked off that was that I could just come in with an iPad mini, and which I used a lot as well. I actually, what I would do is I'd, have my Mac at home and then do my homework on the Mac, but I, start assignments on my iPad. And, with the technology now being integrated into the operating systems, what that meant was that I could easily go and access Avenue to Learn, and sometimes if I wasn't able to do my tests in one of the SAS testing rooms, professors would provide the tests and the assignments in accessible format. Or basically, all they had to do was type it out and send me the electronic copies. And, I would work with those. And it just really made things a lot easier. I definitely wish I had some of the navigational tools that I do now. I definitely wish I had the Meta glasses back then. Because that would have allowed me to, if I wasn't able to get an accessible copy of a book in time for a lecture, then I'd be able to, read it using the Meta glasses in conjunction with something like Seeing AI, which has the ability to scan textbooks. So it's really been fascinating to see. And it's kind of funny because I'm now working in one of my many passions, the assistive technology field, testing websites and applications to make sure that they're screen reader friendly. So, it really, even now, fascinates me how all this, mainstream technology that our sighted peers are using, we can use the same technology. It also means that I'm able to, if my grandma, for example, who started using an iPad a while back, I'm her designated technician. When something goes wrong, I'm able to just turn on voiceover and, fix what need to be fixed, what needs to be fixed, or assist her in any way that I can. So it really, technology, not only in school and in the workplace, but also for personal use, has come a long way.
Yeah, thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. It was really interesting to me to know because I mean even now like with the rate that technology is changing and updating itself all the time, um
Mm-hmm.
it's I'm curious about how well workplaces, how well schools have also been continuously updating their own resources to make sure that they're kind of in line with what's current, like what's the newest thing. Um,
I have no
Yeah.
idea what the newest thing would be, but I just know I went from tape recording to Dragon Naturally Speaking. And I was really happy with Naturally Speaking because it typed for me because I wasn't able to type. But that's as far as I got. So I don't know about newer technologies, but I hear they're really good.
They are. And one of the things that I've been kind of experimenting with, and will continue to experiment with, now I use a combination of JAWS and NVDA and Windows, and I want to actually find out, how good narrator would be for actual productivity. And it seems to have improved a lot. Now, this is the built-in narrator within Microsoft, because ideally, if we can get to a point where narrator would be able to work with, anything that JAWS and NVDA work well with, that means that, employees would just have to, turn on narrator and, get on with their work, which also means that companies wouldn't need to pay for third party accommodations and whatnot. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anya, for that question. Do we have any other questions from our participants, or even from any of our guests as well, or students? Ah, yes, Andrew, I can see in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi. Hi. I too wear hearing aids as well. So I was just wondering how one of my, maybe I should be phrase it, is one of my situations I have a lot is at work is trying to disclose my hearing. And it's a weird situation. I work at university as well. So they're 18, 19, 20. They just don't understand. So when I'm in a lab, I hear background noise. I can't hear. It's toast. So how do you have any suggestions on how I can disclose like nicely to a student saying, maybe can we step out in the hallway? This is a struggle I have almost every day at work. So I just wanted to know how you guys deal with it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Maybe Karen, would you be
Karen,
able
yeah.
to touch on that?
I was going to comment on the technology about avenue to learn.
Sunflower, and it identifies yourself as a person with a disability.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
when I came back in 2018, it was a bit different from when I stopped in 1992. that everything was on Avenue to Learn. And it was interesting because by the time I came back, I was over 65. But then the professor and even the student beside me was helping me navigating the Avenue to Learn. And I was not afraid of it because I was used to in programming. So I was never afraid of the computer. So I'm very lucky about that. And I found it extremely helpful because the professors were downloading their PowerPoints and I was using that. I could split the screen with the videotape and the PowerPoints. And that was totally awesome for me. And I was lucky the first professor that I had in 2018, she was willing to wear, I think, at least 3 hearing devices on her blouse. She said, the more the merrier. She was so accommodating and everything. So that's what made it easy when I came back in 2018 to continue on and get the degree. Because in high school, I wanted to go to university, but I couldn't. Something happened. I couldn't do it. And that's what I want to say. When you've got a goal in your mind, is to follow it and don't give up. So I graduated last year.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Tim has a comment about the last question. Ken.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
Hi, Tim.
Hi. There is a movement within sort of the broader communities, and I believe that it started in Europe and seems to have been kind of making its way to North America. And that is, and I could be wrong on the nature of the identification, but I think it's a sunflower. And organizations and people are starting to use this as an indicator that a person has a disability, and that when they wear this, and it could be in the form of a chain around your neck, it could be a little lapel pin, it could be whatever. There's all kinds of different means by which the identification can be provided. But it's an indication to the community that you are a person with a disability and that you may need some consideration. And so I appreciate that maybe that's something that the institution where you work might have to be asked whether or not they would be willing to adopt such a practice and promote it. But I'm happy to discuss any of these kinds of things offline. You can certainly contact the AHA through the AHA email, which is accessibilityhamilton@gmail.com. You'll find that at the bottom of any of our correspondence, or you'll find it on our website. So happy to have that conversation offline if that's of help. But the identification might be one way of just letting people in your environment know that you are a person with a disability, and fundamentally an invisible disability. So I don't know if that's helpful to you, but something to think about anyway.
Is the word out in communities about the sunflower? Like how people know?
To respond to Kim's question, it's getting out and there's more awareness. So we've talked about this practice around the AHA table, albeit briefly, but we've identified it and talked about how we want to, or if we can, also be an organization that helps to promote this. So it's another awareness tool in the toolbox that we can possibly use.
Now, what about people who have a visible disability, but they might also have like a hearing impairment or a visual impairment. So can the sunflower, would that help them too? Like I use a wheelchair, so it's obvious I have a disability, but just because I use a wheelchair, people may not know I can't see very well either. So
I thought Kim was talking about her additional disability being me. But that said, yeah, I think the whole idea of the identification is to promote the question. So one of the things we've talked about within the AHA team, especially with regard to a recent presentation that we made around disability and accessibility and awareness, was the STARE principle: to stop, think, ask, incorporate all of what you've seen and heard and know, and then respond appropriately. So, again, using those kinds of principles is a good way of not making assumptions about what you think seems to be obvious, because what may be obvious may not always be correct. So those are just things, but it takes a great deal of awareness and promotion and continuous conversation, because the community, the environment is always in change, always in flux.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, for that question. I hope that helps a little bit, maybe brainstorming some things that you might be able to talk through with your employer, like the STOP principle, or the lanyard. Typically, it's a green lanyard with orange sunflowers on it. And yeah, it's been sort of starting to get rolled out, at least at universities and in younger generations.
Cool.
As Tim mentioned, it was in our recent presentation with Hamilton Health Sciences. So trying to get in from the institutional levels as well, and helping other organizations become more aware about it, and it being sort of like a universal symbol for invisible disabilities. So yeah, hopefully that could be something that you might be able to talk through with your employer. But thank you so much again for that question, and feel free to reach out to our email in the chat. I'm sure Tim might be able to continue the conversation as well. Do we have any other questions from our guests or participants today?
If you don't mind, sorry. I have just one more. This is Enya, by the way. And I was curious because I also am involved in like tutoring, as well as in the education space, as well as like in my other volunteering duties as well, speaking to people, some individuals who may have disclosed or not disclosed disabilities to me. And so in a way, and I know Karen, Kim, Kevin, as well as Sienna, you've all discussed the attitudes that you faced when you were in school, either from other students, either from professors, and there was a mix of, there was some good and there's some bad, and I'm sure that's always going to hold true, unfortunately. But is there anything that perhaps that you wished someone would have asked you or maybe brought up to you first, which would have helped maybe them shape their own or maybe change their own attitudes towards perhaps any of the accommodations that you requested when you were in school, maybe that they were, unsure of giving, like, for example, the tape recording or the recording of the lectures and stuff like that?
Interesting, you should say that. In my first year social work class, I had a girl, we were in a small classroom, and she put her foot, I had my scooter, so I backed my scooter against the wall, and she put her foot on my scooter, and she was jiggling her leg up and down, and it was making me jiggle up and down, right? So I said, finally, I said, can you please take your foot off my scooter if you're going to jiggle your leg? Like, people just assume that they can do things without asking first. Like, please ask if you want to put your foot on my scooter, and I'll say no. At least ask. but so many people make assumptions, and I wish they wouldn't.
Yeah, no, that's horrible, Kim. I'm sorry you had
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Sienna, I just see you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that you've experienced that. And you know, I get that sometimes from passersby, not so much in university, but just, you know, if I'm going somewhere and sometimes someone, you know, and a lot of times they could even be, you know, they could mean well. You know, they're trying to help me, and like they'll grab my cane, and I'll ask them nicely. I'll say, you know, would you
No.
please not touch my cane because I need it to
Navigate, yeah.
help me navigate. Yeah.
Yeah. It's my
Yeah, so a lot of
eyes.
it is exactly. So um you know, or if there we're approaching a crowded space, normally what a person would do when guiding me is just, you know, put their hand kind of back a little bit, and I'll know, okay, we're getting into a narrow crowded space. But sometimes people will just, you know, grab my cane, and it's just like no. You know,
Jeez.
even meaning well, when it comes to touching a person's mobility device, you know, ask first
Yes.
before you do. Yeah,
Yes.
general rule of thumb.
That's where Tim's STAIR principle comes in, but not everybody knows it.
Exactly. That's one. Yeah, definitely
Yeah.
one. Or grabbing the person
Oh,
directly.
yeah. Taking their arm and here, let me help. No, don't touch
Yeah,
me. Yeah.
you know, ask first. The best
Yes.
thing you can do is just ask if,
That's
you
right.
know, may I help
Yes.
you? And if the person says yes, you know, what would be the best way for me to
Yes, exactly.
proceed? Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. I know we're reaching the 4 o'clock mark, but
Wow.
on behalf of the Hamilton Accessibility Hamilton Alliance, we just love to thank our speakers today for joining us and sharing your stories and answering some questions. We really appreciate the time that you made to be here today and your openness and honesty. So thank you so much. It means a lot. And yeah, as a reminder, this meeting will be recorded and shared with those who weren't able to make it today, but thank you to all of our participants as well who were able to join us today. We hope that it helped, and we hope to see you again sometime soon for another AHA.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank you.